Well, experts have been poring over the 80,000 pages of documents on the JFK assassination, which have now been declassified. One file details how a US intelligence officer named Gary Underhill travelled from Washington to New Jersey the day after the assassination, and he told friends that a small clique within the CIA was responsible. To discuss, let's bring in now Senior Fellow and Chief Economist at the Institute of Public Affairs, Adam Creighton. Adam, look, the theory that the CIA was involved, it's always been conspiracy theory. It's one that RFK was pushing heavily. But so far, there doesn't seem to be any proof of this, at least in the trove of documents that experts have been through to this point.
Yes, that's right, Sharri. Well, firstly, hats off to President Trump for releasing all these documents. They were meant to be released in 2017, and he in his first term and President Biden also resisted. They're finally out there. Look, the case of the CIA officer that you just mentioned, there are actually scores of people who were mysteriously suicided or so forth in the wake of the assassination attempt. We've known about this for a long time. There's certainly no smoking gun, it seems, in these documents so far. There's no evidence, obviously, that the CIA did it. But of course, you wouldn't expect the CIA to write down such a conspiracy in the first place. But if anything, I would say from what we've seen so far from all these documents, and as you say, there's 80,000 of them, these will only encourage, I would say, further conspiracies. I mean, for instance, we finally saw the full 15-page memo from Arthur Schlesinger, who was one of JFK's top advisors, and he told the president in 1961, just in the wake of the disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion, that the CIA was a world unto itself, that it was out of control, that it had gone rogue. And of course, it was JFK's intention to shut down the CIA. There was a famous quote where he was going to shatter it to 1,000 pieces, quote unquote. So documents like that will only further encourage all of the conspiracies that we've had for so long. And this really is an industry. The JFK assassination has really prompted and triggered a whole industry of suspicion.
All right, let's talk about the budget on Tuesday. Now, this year alone, this is extraordinary. This year alone, so since January, the Albanese government has announced $49 billion of election promises and spending. This year alone, Adam, it hasn't even been 3 months yet.
It's extraordinary.
$49 billion. How worrying is that in terms of, putting pressure on inflation?
Well, very worrying. I mean, extremely worrying. I mean, in the last 3 years, according to the figures of Chris Richardson, we've had the biggest growth in government spending as a share of the economy from 24% to 27% next year since the Whitlam years. I mean, that was 50 years ago. So this is just extraordinary. And, we're still paying for all of this spending with the proceeds of the mining boom. But the mining boom is slowly petering out, and it is going to peter out. And yet we're going to have all of these permanent spending schemes still in place, and we're going to have much larger deficits. So I think next Tuesday night is going to be very depressing, I would say, for anyone who's looking forward to any sort of fiscal rectitude. We've already had the Medicare splurge. There's $8.5 billion. There's another $9 billion. It's only going to get worse over the next few days. There doesn't seem to be any interest on either side of politics, very sadly, to rein in spending.
Yeah, I completely agree. I was speaking about this last night with Warren Hogan. I mean, fiscal conservatism seems to be a thing of the past. We already know that the budget is going to be in deficit, and yet we just keep hearing it's almost day by day more spending announced by the Prime Minister. I mean, but you spoke there about, deficit and debt levels, but what about the impact of this on inflation? Because we've just had a cut from the RBA. If the election spending is so enormous, what impact do you think that will have on inflation? And then could we be facing a rate hike down the track?
Well, I think the conventional wisdom now is that rates are not going to be cut as fast as people would have hoped. I think we just saw the Federal Reserve just a day ago in the US basically increased its inflation forecasts. And of course, interest rates in Australia broadly mirror what's happening in the US. And so if rates in the US are going to stay higher for longer, they're probably going to stay higher for longer here as well. And as you suggest, spending does lead to inflation, especially when it's financed by deficits. We've certainly seen that in the past 3 years. So it is very worrying. And also it's a political puzzle to me, because haven't they learnt from the past 3 years that inflation is so politically toxic? I mean, no one really cares about the unemployment rate. It's inflation, because inflation affects absolutely everyone all the time, every day. So it's very, very toxic. And so it surprises me that both sides of politics are so keen to keep all this spending going.
Yeah, I suppose they think that the inflation will be a flow-on effect that we find out about later, and they're just worried about the short term.
Problem for someone else.
Yeah, well,
Exactly.
or a problem for them, but they just want to win the election. It's that short-term vision. Adam Creighton, great to have you on the show as always. Thanks for your time.